Comes to the Trump trade war. Next guest says if the president's goal in his fight with China is to reduce the trade deficit, he should forget it. But that doesn't mean he's totally against Mr. Trump's tariffs. Here to explain, Martin Feldstein, Harvard University professor and former Council of Economic Advisors chairman under President Reagan. Professor Feldstein, thanks so much for joining us.
Very happy to be with you.
So not for the trade deficit, but for China stealing intellectual property. How would that work?
Well, that's exactly the problem. I mean, the trade deficit is created by our own desire to spend more, to consume more than we produce. And we can't fix that by getting the Chinese to do something different. Even if we reduce our trade deficit with China, it'll just pop up with other countries. But with China, we have a serious problem. The Chinese say to American companies, do you want to do business in China? Then you have to find a partner and you have to share your technology with them. And that way the Chinese are ripping off American technology. So I think I hope the president will make it clear to them that if they don't like these tariffs, they have to change that policy.
Some would argue, who are against the tariffs, that there is a process in place already, Professor, that the WTO actually would be the ultimate arbiter in these cases. I guess that hasn't worked, and you think tariffs could be the exact pressure point that China could submit to?
Well, that is exactly right. There is a WTO process. The U.S. Participated in that. It filed a 301, as it's called, a 301 complaint. But our experience with the WTO is that they just don't deal with the evidence. They just don't find in the U.S. favor in previous cases. So I think here's the idea, is to say to the Chinese, you don't want tariffs on all of your exports to the United States. It's a big issue for you. And if you will take seriously the technology transfer problem, we could take off those tariffs, eliminate those tariffs.
Is it worth it? I mean, in your view as an economist, when you take a look at what these, you mentioned the $500 billion, right, in tariffs, that would be every single little thing that we bring in from China could actually face some sort of tariff. Is that worth it in the end? If we can ensure that intellectual property of U.S. companies is protected in China, is it worth the hit or potential hit to the U.S. economy?
If we could ensure that the U.S. intellectual property is protected without doing this, that would be great. But I don't know how we can do that. So I think we have to say to the Chinese, here's the deal. Come sit down and let's talk about this. And the Chinese have come to recognize that the Chinese, are in violation of WTO rules. They've said already that they're not going to apply this requirement about U.S. companies having a partner in the auto industry generally. It's not clear exactly how broadly they define that. It's not just cars, but parts and so on. So they understand that they should be pulling back from this policy that has been hurting American companies and instead do what every other country does, allow American companies, foreign companies to come in and do business.
So let's go back to the WTO, where you just expressed your frustration a moment ago, and that it's a vexing organization to deal with. It is slow, it is bureaucratic, and it generally has not held on the side of the United States. The president in recent days has kind of hinted, well, what the hell good is it? And should we choose to stay in it? What do you think?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a much bigger, more complicated question.
You mean you don't think we can solve that one in 2 minutes here on CNBC?
No, but I think what we can solve is to recognize that the Chinese are in violation of the WTO rule that they signed on to when they joined the WTO.
So let me go go ahead, finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, well, I was just going to say, what the Chinese say is, well, we don't make anybody do this. They voluntarily, American companies voluntarily choose to come to China knowing they're going to have a partner. But that's just extortion.
Yeah, it's voluntary with a gun to their head. Either you come in and do what we tell you you're going to do, or you don't come in. Would you educate me a little bit, because I'm trying to wrap my head around this trade stuff, and it is bloody complex. I read in your article in the Journal that if we were to reduce our trade deficit with the Chinese by X billion dollars or $100 billion, we would perforce then increase our trade deficit with other countries. Did I understand you right? And if I did, why is that true? Why is, if you reduce one, you end up going bigger on another?
Well, you understood it perfectly. And the reason is this. I'll say it in different ways. The trade deficit of the United States is the result of the fact that we want to spend more as American consumers. We want to spend more than we produce. So if we want to spend more than we produce, we have to import that difference from someplace. Well, if we're not importing it from the Chinese, then we're going to have to import it from others. So reducing the trade deficit with China will simply shift that trade deficit to some other country.
Professor, always good to see you. Martin Feldstein, thank you.
Good being with you.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.